when you work on a touring property, I get to figure out, okay, if the UFC is in Columbus this week, where are these people coming from? How far out are
That's
they
cool.
coming from? What are their buying patterns? How do I segment this out and figure out, okay, who's buying our high, middle, and low price tickets?
That's
And
sweet.
then turn that around. And then next week we're in Knoxville. And the next week we're in Tampa. And the next week we're in Atlanta. And
Yeah.
you get to do that all around the country. That's awesome. You learn so much about how sports fans differ in different parts of the country. And it's
Yeah.
so fascinating to dive into those buying habits, which like really leads to what I do today with WWE on such a greater scale.
Welcome everyone to the Tech Guide podcast, where we give actual advice to those wanting to break into tech or looking for their next gig. We have Billy Nayden on the podcast today. Welcome, Billy. Super excited to have you on today.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. Appreciate it.
This is going to be a great conversation about data, storytelling, sports, how those are all intertwined in the advice that you have for someone that's wanting to get into this industry. But I do want to start us off because your LinkedIn bio states that you love storytelling and you've loved storytelling ever since like grade school. Is there a book or a movie from your younger childhood that stands out to you because of like the story that was told?
I've always been a big science fiction fan. I've always been a
Mm,
big anime fan. I think it goes hand in hand with just the absolute nerdiness that comes with being in the tech and data world. But I, as a kid, remember watching Neon Genesis Evangelion for the first time, which is like a 1997 26 episode classic
okay.
Japanese anime. And the story, the depth of the characters, the emotionality of it, the way that they were able to string all these like philosophical tropes through this journey in what's ultimately a 26 episode cartoon. That's the one that really sticks out that I'm like, that kind of sparked me like really thinking about how do you tell stories and how can you impart philosophy or impart life advice through a story. And that's the one that sticks out for me.
That's so awesome. And because now you're really combining your love for storytelling with analytics. So let's talk a little bit about your analytics background. Can you take us a little bit more around SMU, where you first got really interested in data? Yeah, take us to that time.
Yeah, so it really comes from being interested in sports, right? Like I
Mm,
came of age academically, like my high school and undergrad, I was square in the middle of the Moneyball era, the sports
yep.
analytics revolution. Guys like
Cool.
John Hollinger were starting to get really popular. And I would sit up at night and debate with my engineer roommate in college, who the best NBA player was. And at the time LeBron had just gone to the Heat. It was like, will LeBron ever win one? Like, and it ultimately led us to figuring out, okay, what metrics should we be using to evaluate players, right? And so
Mm,
that kind of led me down this path of trying to learn more math, more statistics, just better understanding of analytics, literally, so I could have smarter sports conversations.
that's awesome.
But like knowing I wanted to be in sports, I pursued that and was told like the best route in is ticket sales. So that's what I
Mm,
did straight out of college, went to go work for the Philadelphia 76ers in ticket sales,
sick.
straight in the heart of the process. I was there when they drafted Joel Embiid. And let me tell you, man, trying to sell Philly sports fans tickets to a 15-win basketball team ain't easy.
Yeah.
But Sam Hinkie was there. So I remember like getting conversations with Hinkie where he would come talk to the staff and
Yeah.
talk about what numbers he looked at, how he evaluated things. And I sat there and I said, you know what? I'm a pretty terrible ticket salesman, but I'm really interested in data. So I ended up
Interesting.
talking to one of the data guys at the Sixers. We had lunch together and he said, look, go outside of sports, go learn data. And if you still want to be back in, once you've learned it, you'll be able to come right back. So that's exactly what I did. I went and worked for a real estate data company in Dallas. I worked for Essilor, which was an eyeglass manufacturer, and like really honed in on learning SQL, learning Python,
That's cool.
learning data structures so that I could then turn around and get my master's in data science and like really take off running on analyzing the sports that I cared about all along and just didn't have the tools to do. And over time, learn the skills I needed to do the analysis that I wanted
Cool.
to do all those years ago when I was having late night conversations with my college roommate.
Yeah. I'm curious, why would do you think that advice was so good to leave the industry to learn about analytics? Is it because like it's so hard to break into at a sports gig, or is it just like, yeah, like why was that advice so good?
So I think this is a little bit better now. I'm talking about like 2014, so almost 10
Yeah.
years ago here. But at the time, sports analytics, the idea of using math to evaluate players, to evaluate the business like in a serious way was
Interesting.
nascent, right? It was not like a big part of the industry. For me, you had to go outside it because big business and Fortune 500 companies were using kind of business analytics and models and these deep learning ideas at the time that just didn't exist in the sports industry.
Yep.
And I think that's the most important thing when you're young in your career is it's not about the entry level job, right? It's about finding a place that's going to help you develop the skills that you
Mm,
need to eventually go deeper and be part of the kind of tech decisions that ultimately you want. And so for me, that just didn't exist in sports, but it
yeah.
existed outside of it. And it was skills that I could learn that were directly translatable to the industry I wanted to be in.
Interesting. So would you recommend someone that they might be fresh out of school, they're like, "Hey, I want to get into sports analytics." Would you recommend them to not go into sports right away and try to break in later, or how would you recommend it now?
It's very dependent on the company, right? Like I think a lot of people come into sports or in especially sports analytics, and their
Yeah.
dream is to work on the team side, right? They want to work for the Yankees. They want to work for the Panthers. They want to
Yeah.
work for whoever like they grew up a fan of. And the reality is like on that team side of things, a lot of times like you're brought in to do a very specific role, and there's not a lot of opportunity outside of that. Like these team
Interesting.
organizations run really lean, right?
Yep.
And their front office staffs are really lean. And that's by design, where if you go to, say, an agency or
Mm,
a minor league sports, college sports, organizations like the UFC, the WWE, professional
mhm.
bull riding, like these kind of touring properties or more niche sports, like you're able to wear a lot more different hats. And that
Interesting.
really helps you grow and get the skills that you need to eventually move up. But on the flip side,
Yeah.
if you go into, say, finance or you go into some sort of tech company or manufacturing or things like
Mhm.
that, the dollar amounts are just so much bigger and the business need for analytics is so much greater. You can sometimes find that you get a lot better training, at least on the job.
Mm.
But ultimately, like whatever path you choose, like to me, I think it comes down to what work are you willing to put in outside of the actual job.
Interesting.
I mean, that's how I pushed ahead. And in my opinion, is I was spending time every day after work doing coding practices and
That's so
thinking
cool.
of models and thinking of analyses and writing and that sort of thing to make sure that I was like really honing my sports analytics skills and answering the questions that I wanted to answer.
Interesting. So let's talk about one of your roles, like one of your first roles in like a sports organization, like working on analytics. Like what were some of the projects that you worked on that you like were really excited about?
Yeah, so I think my first like real sports analytics role, right?
Yeah.
I was working for an ad agency called Forefront Ads. We were the agency of record for the
Yep.
UFC
That's
and
cool.
figuring out working on a touring property is so cool. And it's
Mhm.
so underrated, I think, in the industry, right? Where if you're the Knicks analyst, right? You deal like Madison Square Garden is great. It's my favorite arena in the world, but like you're working on that one arena.
Yep.
When you work on a touring property, I get to figure out, okay, if the UFC is in Columbus this week, where are these people coming from? How far out are
That's
they
cool.
coming from? What are their buying patterns? How do I segment this out and figure out, okay, who's buying our high, middle, and low price tickets?
That's
And
sweet.
then turn that around. And then next week we're in Knoxville, and the next week we're in Tampa, and the next week we're in Atlanta. And
Yeah.
you get to do that all around the country. That's awesome. You learn so much about how sports fans differ in different parts of the country. And
Yeah.
it's so fascinating to dive into those buying habits, which like really leads to what I do today with WWE on such a greater scale.
Interesting. So when you're talking about touring like properties, you're talking about like a WWE that might have something in Columbus, in Nashville, in Orlando, in Austin, for example. And so you guys are able to take this data from who's buying like high level tickets just at all these different areas. And then you're putting that into a story format, I presume, or like how are you presenting this data?
Yeah. So it's, I mean, looking at this, I mean, there's all kinds of different ways you could slice this, right? You can
Yeah.
look at market grades, right? Where you're saying
So
like,
cool.
okay, here are all my A markets, and here's what we can expect for our buying patterns, our sales cycle, or here's how many price levels we think we should have. And then there's
Interesting.
B markets and C markets and whatever, and figuring out, okay, if I'm in Dallas on Monday and want to be in Denver on Friday, like what's
Yeah.
in between there that would be a good market for us to hit? There's all that kind of stuff. But then you can also look at this regionally of,
Mm.
do people in the Northeast buy tickets differently than the people in the Southeast? We know these are
Interesting.
all fans of the property, right? But it's figuring out like, what are these regional differences? What can we expect? Is this a market that buys really early, or is this a market that buys day of at the box office? Which
Wow.
I know that's crazy, but it still exists in a lot of places. And so it's really segmenting out as much as possible. What are the similarities? What are the differences? What are the patterns? And looking at how can we use that to form our promotional strategy, right? And if this is a huge walk-up market, obviously you always want people to buy tickets earlier.
Yep.
Because it helps us forecast it. It's money in the hand, that sort of thing, right? So if it's a walk-up market, you're going to have to push prior to that harder than you would for a market that buys early, as opposed to somewhere where you're just trying to fill those last sets of seats, and day of the show, you want to run a promo for $25 upper deck tickets or something like that. It all the data that we get on ticket buying informs how we promote a show in each individual market. And
That's
like
cool.
when you're WWE, you're doing 300 plus shows a year. Like that needs to be so templatized and so systematized,
Yeah.
because you don't have time to dial in on every single event eh, the way you would for a 16 game NFL season.
Interesting. I'm curious. So what the technologies that you're using to decipher all this data or use this data to visualize it? I mean, what are some of the technologies that you're using that someone should learn at an early age? So if they do want to do something like this, they know how to do it.
Yeah. Always start with SQL. I
Okay.
think, I do think there will be a day where SQL might go by the wayside. I
Yeah.
don't think we're there yet. And I just think it's such a good fundamental coding language to learn first, because ultimately everything you do is going to be around pulling data. I think it's great to just have even just basic SQL to learn that object oriented programming syntax.
Yep.
From there, once you feel comfortable, at least as an intermediate at worst SQL user,
Yeah.
Python is the next route to go, I think, because I pull all of my data with SQL, right? And
Yeah.
I'm making sure I have the right data set with SQL. But anytime I want to model anything, anytime I want to look at correlations or look at any kind of collinearity, that sort of thing, like Python is crucial. But the thing I will caution everyone against is like
Hmm.
computer science, coding, all that. It's great. It's very important. It is useless if you don't understand statistics. Basic AP high school statistics is still crucial for a lot of what I do. I'm talking about confidence intervals. I'm looking
That's
at
sweet.
multicollinearity. I'm looking at what kind of curve is best to model a particular data set. That's all high school level and maybe slightly above math. And to me, that is a component of the industry that's really lacking right now. That like a lot of people are in tune to the idea that you need to learn to code.
Hmm.
Very few people are in tune to the idea that you need to have at least a base level understanding of statistics, because ultimately, like statistics is an English class.
Yeah.
If you think about statistics as a math class, you're doing a lot of writing.
Hmm.
That's all business analytics, sports analytics is like, I'm running analyses, I'm doing math, and ultimately I'm turning this into a story so that I can go talk to a C-level executive who hasn't taken a math class in 15 years. So I, I need to take the math and translate it into, okay, what's going on here and what do we do about it?
And were these all things that you learned? Like, how did you learn this? Was this through the master's, like your master's course with SMU, or is this something that you learned on the job of, oh, I need to learn statistics?
I took stats in college and high school, right?
Yeah.
And was always interested in it and always saw how it was like immediately applicable.
Yeah.
I think it's a combination of experiences, right? It's one of these things where I had this idea of what I wanted to do and how I wanted to use my skill set. And what I did was I talked to as many people as possible, like people who are peers, people who are already in the industry,
Yeah.
people at like bars, like at airports, just saying, "Hey, this is what I want to do. What do you think?" And just
Hmm.
collect thoughts. And
That's cool.
as I talked to people more and more, I realized, okay, like what we're really talking about is statistical storytelling or data
Mm.
storytelling. Like that's like I synthesized that and I
Yeah.
said, okay, what are the two components that lead you to the insights that you then put in your story? Okay, it's computer science and statistics ultimately, right? So
Interesting.
I figured out that if I was going to focus on my hard skills and really nail down what I wanted, those were the two areas. So I would take, if there was like LinkedIn learnings or random stuff work would offer, I'd take them. I would go to the trainings that were offered, no matter how applicable I thought it was. And then ultimately that led me to say, okay, I need to like really lock in on this, and I'm going to do a master's because I need the accountability of a
Mhm.
degree program to make sure that I am like continuing to develop these technical skills. And it's one of the best decisions I ever made. I think a lot of people put down the idea of additional formal schooling sometimes,
Mhm.
especially in the tech world. And I hate to break it to you, like you're not Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates.
Yeah.
Like a lot of more of us need that formalized training than we like to let on. And it gives you a level of accountability that is unmatched if you're doing it self-taught. And then on top of that, you meet a bunch of people who are in this industry. So
Interesting.
it really helps you, where I have friends from grad school who I can text and say, hey, I have a work problem. How would you go about fixing this?
Yeah.
And they can help me through it. And that's invaluable to have a
Yep.
network of people who are knowledgeable about what you do every day.
Yeah, we had Christian Bordeaux on a former episode. He works at analytics at Netflix right now, but he also got his master's in like analytics from like USC, and that's what he also said was that the networking experience, like in a master's program, is like one of the most valuable parts that you actually get from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the data science world where everything is so rapidly changing all the time. I mean, there's so many, like the amount of Python packages that come out every day is nuts. So to have that network where I can't be everywhere all at once and I can't focus on everything all at once. And there's going to be solutions that I could use at work that don't come across my radar. But
Yeah.
I have buddies from masters that I can text and call up, and they may come across that because a lot of them do very different data science roles than me.
Yeah.
And so it's so good to just have that kind of network of, okay, I basically all these people who are watchdogging the industry for me. And
Yeah.
we have this kind of knowledge share. It is invaluable.
Interesting. What are some of the projects that like other people are working on right now? Like your data science friends, like what are some of like things that like they're being exposed to right now?
Oh, I have a buddy in manufacturing who works at it's really like a metalworking plant, and he has to
Interesting.
figure out how to like make these assembly lines work. I have a buddy who
Yes.
works in freight logistics. I have a buddy who works in the medical field and
Yeah.
is literally like testing drug efficacies and things like that, and looking
That's
at
crazy.
how drugs react with the body. But and then I have buddies who are in like very traditional tech roles at like SAP and companies like that, where it's you're literally working on the future of database structures and like how to organize a data science team. And so I have friends all across this industry working in all kinds of different roles. And there's just like, it's one of those things where data science is like the it girl at the ball right now. And every company, every industry is looking to find a way that they can use kind of algorithms and models and math and things like that to improve their business. And that doesn't matter if it's WWE or finance or real estate or manufacturing or medicine, like it's everywhere now. And so there's almost like limitless opportunity, especially if you find the right firm and find
For sure.
executives who see the value in the practice.
That's what I was just about to say, actually. You hit it right on the head. Like data science to me right now is like in data analytics is like the it girl at the ball where like the the applications for these big analytics to apply to business decisions, I think is like what makes analytics so cool. And you just gave five perfect examples there of like how it's being used across so many different industries. And there's so many different ways that you can get into analytics and usage cases for analytics.
I think, and it's funny to me that there was ever resistance to this because back in the day before we had terms like data science and
Yeah.
analytics, we used to just call this evidence. That's really what you're talking about here. It's, hey, this is what's happening in our business, and here's
Yeah.
the evidence that it's happening. And then we make a business decision about it. That's all
Yeah.
business analytics is. It, it's very complex ways to get to very simple solutions and answers, which that's why you run into sometimes people who don't think there's value to it or don't think it's like as difficult as it is because if you're a good data scientist, I could tell you what's going on in one or two sentences. But you don't see the 2 weeks of models and work and analysis
Mhm.
I had to do to get to those sentences, right? And
Yeah.
so that's the crucial thing, I think, is making sure that you're able to effectively communicate, but
Yeah.
have someone who understands that this is not just something you can step in and be insightful, right? Like you
Yeah.
really do need to know the technical stuff in order to get to the actual insights.
Yeah. Well, that's what I also wanted to ask too, because 2 weeks of like, working on data, it's like me as I'm not a huge numbers person. To me, that would be very hard to do. So I'm just like, curious, what's the non-glamorous side of working in sports analytics?
I mean, this is true of data science in general, but sports analytics is as bad as anywhere. Like data wrangling is awful. Like the process of, okay, this isn't in the exact format that I need.
Yeah.
I need to do all this like weird filtering to get to my correct data set. Like all of that work is not fun at all. And it's usually one of these things where like I put my headphones on, put some put some music on and grit my teeth and bear it.
Oh man.
But the idea that like I think there's this idea out there that you're going to have constantly clean data sets, and it could not be further from the truth. And especially when you're in sports analytics, right? Like, say we do about 300 plus shows a year. That's 200 plus arenas, give or take.
Yeah.
70% of those arenas are going to be Ticketmaster. About 20% are going to be AXS. And then
Okay.
the other 10% are going to be God knows what. So you're potentially looking at 15 to 20 different data structures for ticketing
And
that you need to figure out and put together and make into a nice, clean slide. Because when I got to send PowerPoint to the CEO of WWE,
yeah.
he doesn't have time to data wrangle.
Oh.
That's my job. So it's like it's like very non-glamorous of cleaning that up, making sure everything matches, making sure everything makes sense. And then you get into the actual storytelling, which is the fun part.
Yeah, I wanted to I can't imagine sending the CEO of WWE, "Hey, take this data for me." But I do
Yeah.
wanna talk about that. Talk to me about like, the projects that, like, go into or talk to me about the steps that go into a typical, like, project, like your data wrangling to, like, presentation. Can you highlight just some of the steps that go into a typical project?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work on a pseudo agile model where it's not
Interesting.
like truly organized in sprints, but we have a Kanban board. We have tasks that we meet twice a week as a
Yeah,
team to go through, okay, what's to do, what's in the backlog, what's been sent out, that sort of thing, right? So like it's constant planning.
yep.
The basically when you decide like a new project is going to get done, right? Like we had an I we will spend like usually 5 minutes just thinking of ideas for
Yeah,
analyses in these kind of biweekly huddles. But we take, when something gets moved from the backlog to do, right? It's
interesting.
okay. What data do we need? Like, where does that data live? Is there anything that we're missing, right? I can't give you a demographic analysis on customers. I don't have demographics, for instance, right?
Yep.
So we do that assessment of basically what data do I need? How do I get to it, right?
Mhm.
And then we usually look at, okay, here's 2 or 3 ways that I would go about this analysis in theory. So I'm going to use XGBoost and I'm going to do
Yeah,
a tree-based model, or I'm going to organize this data into bins. I think that makes the most sense.
interesting.
Or I'm going to use percentiles or whatever, right? And we talk that through and ultimately as a team come to the conclusion of, okay, here's where the data lives. Here's going to be our approach, right?
Yeah,
Then you get into our non-glamorous side of, okay, I actually have to now go get this data. I got
data.
to pull it. I got to make
Yep.
sure it's clean, all that, right?
Make sure
And
it
then I'm
looks
going to
good.
plug it into my model and I'm going to send out a very rough results, usually in an Excel, in a Python notebook, something like that, to
Yeah,
the team to say, okay, here's my takeaways and bullets. Here's the data. Here's the analysis. Does that make sense? If they say, yep, looks great,
right.
then it goes into a PowerPoint where usually it's a visual, a couple bullet points, like I said, 1 or 2 sentences about what's going on. And then that goes out to whoever the business stakeholder is, right?
Yeah,
Um, if they're like, hey, I think you should look at it like this, we can sometimes go back to the method. Sometimes we
yep.
pull additional data sets, that sort of thing. But ultimately, it's like a very collaborative process, but it's with somebody kind of leading the charge. Obviously, like coding and analysis is like a very individual pursuit.
Ye
It's hard to do that in a team. So it's basically, okay, we come up with the plan as a team.
Yeah,
Somebody goes and does it on their own. The team checks it, and then it gets put in like a pretty nice package in PowerPoint and sent off to whoever it needs to go to.
interesting. One project that comes to mind that you may work on, may not work on is like, so you guys have over 300 events a year. And let's just say you go to Columbus. I don't know why I keep using Columbus. You go to Columbus like 2021 and then 2022 comes around. You guys are going to Columbus again. How much do you rely on like the historical data that you do have to like really
Huge. It's massive.
interesting?
What's amazing to me is even as the technology changes, even
Yeah.
as the entertainment landscape changes, like the way fans buy tickets stays so similar in particular markets.
That's
It's
crazy.
baked into the fabric of, these cities, right? And so
Yeah.
we lean heavily on history. Like that's how when we're looking at projections, I'm always looking at, okay, here's the gross we did there last time. Here's the sales cycle roughly. Like I did a lot of
Interesting.
data with sales cycles. It doesn't make a ton of sense to look at things day to day.
Yeah.
It's really about looking at on sale, looking at the week of the show and figuring out, okay, at this point in on sale, roughly how many, like what percentage of tickets will be sold, using that to project out and figure out, okay, we can expect we're going to sell 8,000 tickets in Columbus this time around, something
Interesting.
like that. But hugely reliant on history, but also reliant on not just quantitative history, but
Yeah.
qualitative.
Interesting.
So I know, like, we just got back from Tampa, right? Our last event in Tampa was end of 22,
Okay.
and it was a humongous event because it was John Cena's only wrestling match in the WWE in 2022.
Makes sense.
So I know in my head this last Monday Night Raw in Tampa, which still sold very well, is not going to do as well as John
No.
Cena. And there's no number that's telling me that. It's like I
Yeah.
have to like intrinsically know and remember and look through my history of I have literally every show since July of 2021 in a giant, massive spreadsheet with notes next to it of if there's anything that was like special that was advertised.
And
So I'm
that's
not
cool.
just looking at the history and looking at the numbers, but also able to say, like, here's why the show in 2022 did better than this one. And it's not because we didn't promote well or not because we didn't utilize data the way that we could have. It's there's sometimes just, especially in WWE, you get these special events and
Yep.
like it brings people out.
Exactly. And it would be like if Tom Brady's only plays in one game next year, like it's obviously
Right.
going to sell like a crazy amount. Um, I am curious too. So like you have the historical data, but let's just say you guys are going to test like a new market. Let's just say you're going to go to, I don't know if you've ever been to Des Moines, Iowa.
We
Like,
have many times.
okay, I don't, market you haven't been in before.
Yeah,
Like, how do you guys analyze? Oh, like, how do we know this is going to be successful if you don't have any historical data on it? Or how does, yeah, someone like
sure.
Saints do that?
First off, I think the WWE is such a strong brand
For
that
sure.
like it's almost never can we go to any city and it's not successful, right?
Yeah.
It's obviously varying degrees of success, but very rare that it would be not successful. Um, what I look at too is I have similarity scores on markets, right? So it's
That's so
I know that like a Des Moines, right, is going to be it's like a very similar market to like a Champaign, Illinois.
yep.
It's a very similar market to like a Madison, Wisconsin. So there are places that we have been that even if we
Yeah.
haven't been to like that exact venue or that exact market,
Yeah.
I can, look at similar markets and say, okay, I think Madison's maybe a little bit bigger, Champagne's a little bit smaller. Let's find somewhere in the middle there. And that's about where I can project, somewhere
Interesting.
like Des Moines. We just had this happen in Miami. It's not that we never played Miami before. That would be crazy. But we
Yeah.
recently have a show at the University of Miami. We usually play where, the Heat
Mm.
Arena. And so without any historicals trying to figure out, okay, should we basically treat this is Coral Gables? Are we going to treat that the exact same as we're going to treat the downtown Miami arena,
Yeah.
or is it slightly different? And trying to figure that out. But again, it's a lot looking at similarity in venue, similarity in show type. Like,
Yeah.
is it a TV? Is it a pay-per-view? Is it a non-televised event? And then
Interesting.
you can triangulate projections from there.
That is so cool. And so if you are going to compare like a Madison and Des Moines, is it based on like demographics and like income ranges, or is that what you guys typically look at? That is so sweet.
Yeah. So you're going to look at census data. There's a lot of information that we have around roughly, I think it's roughly 3% of the United States is a WWE fan, right?
Yeah.
So we're able to look at, okay, what's the population of a Madison? And like we
Mhm.
have information based on survey data about how many sports fans there are there, right?
Yeah.
And so you can start to do some market sizing if you say, okay, I know there are 200,000 sports fans in Madison. 3% of those are going to be WWE fans. So we're looking at 6,000 WWE fans, right? Like and you can do that all over the country. There's all different ways to look at that. But essentially, yeah, we're looking at, census demographic data. We're looking at nationwide research firms that do market sizing on sports fans. And then
Yeah.
we know that 3% number more or less holds true. Obviously, like there are markets that are more into WWE. There are markets that are less into WWE. Like we're
That's so
much bigger
sweet.
in the Southeast than we are in the West Coast. But ultimately, you can figure that out and figure out, okay, what's my rough market size of potential wrestling fans in a given city?
I think what's so neat about this conversation is just like how much like analytics drives like sports like organizations decisions because some people like they think of sports as like entertainment at the end of the day like WWD is a company, the NFL at the end of the day is a company. You can compare it to like a Google or something. So I think it's so cool how analytics are being used to drive business decisions. And I do want to ask our last question based on this. So not on business decisions, but just on analytics in sports. MLB is like a perfect one where analytics have just taken over the game. Like people are shifting based on batting statistics or whatnot. So do you think like analytics for sports on just the playing side is good or bad for the sport or both?
So I think it's good, but what I will say is it's becoming clearer and clearer as people become more analytically driven, more analytically inclined, how much creativity still matters in this
Mm,
industry. You think of analytics, you think of very black and white cookie cutter things, and it's really not because if everyone has the same information, if everyone has the same strategy, you actually don't have an advantage, right?
true.
The whole idea behind Moneyball and the whole idea behind sports analytics is they were doing stuff that other teams weren't doing. They were thinking
Exactly.
of ways to approach the game that other teams weren't. And so I think it's great for the game, but I think it's also potentially very boring if
Mhm,
people don't utilize the creativity that's always driven success in sports in the first place. So
for sure.
analytics is a tool. It's not like a guide for here's the manual how you win the World Series in baseball, right? It doesn't work like that. You have to get creative. You have to think outside the box. And then you have
That's
to
fair.
use the analytical tools, the logical tools that you have to make the best possible decision for your organization.
Nice. I love that. Philly, this was an awesome episode. Thank you so, so much for joining us. Where can people connect with you? Where can people learn a little bit more about you?
Yeah. I'm on LinkedIn, Billy Nayden, at B Nayden on Twitter. I'm always tweeting about random things, or I guess it's called X now. I
Whatever.
don't know, whatever, but that's my most active social media by far. And obviously feel free to send me messages there or send me messages on LinkedIn. Happy to help anyone who's looking to break into sports analytics.
Awesome, Billy. Thank you so much for the conversation today.
Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate it.